Hey guys, in today's video we're going to be figuring out if the Christian God truly exists. First, I believe that there could be a God, but there's no evidence for it being any of the specific gods that humans have outlined through history. When I look at the thousands of religions, all with competing claims about creation, morality, and the afterlife, it seems more likely that these reflect cultural imagination rather than objective truth. I'm not rejecting the idea of a divine creator outright. I'm saying that we don't have sufficient evidence to identify this creator, if one exists, as the Christian God, the Islamic God, or any other. A Christian might say to this that there is evidence for the Christian God in the form of miracles, prophecy, and historical continuity found in the Bible. They might argue that the Bible reports real events, Jesus' resurrection, the plagues in Egypt, healings, and signs witnessed by groups of people, not just metaphorical stories. To them, this is compelling evidence that Christianity is divinely inspired rather than humanly invented. I would reply that the problem with that reasoning is that the miracles reported in the Bible are confirmed only by the Bible itself. That doesn't mean they automatically didn't happen, but it does mean that evidence doesn't stand independently. If I handed you a comic book of Superman and said, "See, he's real, look at what he did in this book," you would reject that immediately. Why? Because the claim comes from within the source, not supported by external verification. A text asserting its own authority isn't proof, it's only a claim to be examined. Then a Christian might respond that the Bible isn't merely self-assertive, it's supported by historical evidence and eyewitness testimony. They might point out that many biblical accounts, such as those involving ancient Israelite kings, cities, and customs, have been confirmed by archaeology. Moreover, the New Testament documents were written within decades of Jesus' life when eyewitnesses were still alive. If these writings contained falsehoods about events people saw firsthand, the early audience would have rejected them immediately. To that, I'd say confirmation of certain details isn't the same as confirmation of divine activity. If archaeology proves that Jerusalem existed, that doesn't mean a man walked in water there. Even if the Gospels capture real locations and real people, the supernatural conclusions remain unverified. It's possible that these stories reflect the beliefs and interpretations of a devout community, not literal events. People are known to mythologize or reinterpret experiences, especially when it supports their worldview. The existence of historical places doesn't validate miracles any more than the existence of London validates the wizardry in Harry Potter world. The Christians might reply that this underestimates the strength of the resurrection claim, which stands at the core of Christianity. They'd argue that Jesus' resurrection isn't one miracle among many, it's the central, transformative event in history. The disciples, once fearful and dispersed, became bold proclaimers willing to die for their testimony that they saw the risen Christ. Entire communities formed around this conviction within years, not centuries. The rapid rise of Christianity, even under persecution, shows that something extraordinary happened, something more than a legend. My response would be that sincerity doesn't equal truth. People from every religion have died for what they believe in. Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and countless others. People die for false ideas all the time. What their sacrifice tells us is that they were convinced, not that they were right. Historical movements can build around myths, especially when they offer meaning, hope, or identity. Look at how quickly legends and conspiracy theories can spread even in the age of documentation. Multiply that by ancient oral culture, and it's easy to see how stories could evolve into convictions that felt real. At this point, the Christian might emphasize that the resurrection isn't based on blind faith, but on multiple sources: 4 Gospels, letters from Paul, and independent mentions in non-Christian writings like Tacitus and Josephus. They might argue that the disciples had no incentive to fabricate a resurrection story since it brought them persecution and death. Unlike myths, which usually serve political or cultural purposes, the early Christian messages subverted its environment and offered no earthly gain. I would counter that ancient people often saw martyrdom as the ultimate proof of conviction, and social movements have always sprung up from charismatic leaders, even those later disconfirmed by evidence. The fact that followers were willing to suffer doesn't necessarily prove what they claimed is true, it proves that they were convinced of it. Furthermore, texts like Josephus and Tacitus aren't first-hand eyewitness accounts, they're later mentions based on what early Christians themselves were saying. That's hearsay, not verification. When all sources ultimately trace back to believers, the evidence becomes circular rather than independent. The Christian might then step away from purely historical reasoning and appeal to personal transformation. They'd say Christianity isn't just a matter of old texts, it's a living experience confirmed by changed lives and answered prayers. Millions throughout history have felt God's presence, a sense of forgiveness, and moral renewal throughout their faith in Christ. They might argue that such transformation, multiplied across time and culture, points toward something real. To that I'd say experience is deeply persuasive to the one feeling it, but it isn't proof of universal truth. People of all belief systems, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, even followers of new religious movements, report equally profound experiences of the divine or transcendent. Human psychology is wired for awe, moral elevation, and meaning making. Experiencing peace after prayer or guidance during hardship may speak more about how the mind interprets devotion than about the literal existence of a single divine being. Emotional depth and truth are not synonymous. The Christian might reply that while other religions produce some good feelings or moral guidance, Christianity uniquely explains the human condition, our moral failure, longing for redemption, and hope for eternity. They might claim that the biblical narrative resonates in a way that feels fundamentally true to human experience, that creation was meant for good, that evil distorts it, and that God's intervention restores it through grace. This, they'd say, is not just philosophy, but emotional and existential truth aligning with moral reality. I'd respond that these ideas are compelling because they are archetypal. They appear in different forms across many cultures. Concepts of fall, redemption, and renewal are embedded in human storytelling from the Epic of Gilgamesh to modern films. We naturally relate to these patterns. That coherence doesn't mean divine revelation uniquely produced it. It could mean our psychology gravitates towards such narratives. A story can feel profoundly true without being literally supernatural. At that point, the Christian might conclude that faith isn't opposed to reason but goes beyond what reason can fully prove. They might say that God's existence cannot be subjected into laboratory testing because he's not a physical object within the universe. He's the ground of all being. Just as we can't prove love or consciousness with absolute certainty, we can't fully prove God, but we can discern his presence through reason, moral law, beauty, and experience. And I would end by saying that such arguments shift the goalposts. If God becomes something that can't be externally tested but must only be felt or discerned internally, then belief ceases to be about evidence and becomes about interpretation. I respect those who find meaning through faith, but that doesn't mean the standard of objective verification. I remain open-minded, not hostile. Maybe there is a creator beyond what we can grasp, but until we have verifiable, reproducible evidence of divine intervention or revelation, I'll stay agnostic, acknowledging that we don't know and may never know, yet continuing to seek truth with honesty rather than certainty. I'm open to any debates if you guys have some, and I appreciate you for watching. Thank you and have a good day.